Welcome to the Mada and Hugh Show. I'm Hugh.
I'm Mada, and for today we have a special guest. But before revealing him, we would like to ask each other one question. Hugh, would you like to start?
Sure. So the question is, do you ever get nervous playing concerts? Now, we've played a number of concerts, but in fact, you just played, at the time of this recording, you just played a very major concert performing with Trio Casals at Carnegie Hall. Last night,
Yeah.
at the time of this recording.
Wow.
And so my question to you is, were you nervous?
Yes. The answer is always, always, always yes. It does not get easier with age. It does not disappear with age. So, how about you?
You know, for me, it was such a crippling thing as a young pianist that I almost quit playing the piano because it was so bad. We can talk a little bit about some of the. In fact, let's talk about some of the effects. Yeah. So for me, when I got nervous, my hands would freeze, my feet would freeze. Trying to play a run or a passage, forget it. I was barely able to clump out chords. I would lose all fine motor flexibility or dexterity. I couldn't do anything. It was so crippling. Of course, that little, the knot in your stomach, the sweating, and it was like I was a frozen statue. What about you? What are some of the effects that you suffer with?
Well, pretty much like you just described, but the most preeminent one was flight. It's either fight or flight. So for me was the
urge to
sensation,
run away.
the urge to run away, to not be there. Mm-hmm. It was that fear that would paralyze everything and would annihilate every information that I had acquired, right? Like kind of preparation. So the preparation would diminish, or the feeling that, I cannot play at the best of my abilities anymore. So actually one time I hit the bottom, so to speak. And it was a competition. It was a national competition in Bucharest. I had just had my bachelor's graduation exam. It was very tiring, very hard exam with 3 trials, and the competition was 1 week after, and I was supposed to play exactly what I had just played a week ago. The problem was that the competition had 3 rounds. I made it till the final. I don't know how. I was hoping not to. And in the final round, at some point, I was playing Franck Prelude Chorale in Fugue, which is a very demanding piece, not just for playing, but also to memorize. And at some point, I got completely lost. And of course, it had happened before, but I usually, just move on. And at that point, I couldn't. At that point, I felt that's it. Yeah. And I stopped. I looked up at the member of the jury, and I said, "I'm sorry, I cannot continue."
Oh, no.
And they, a few of them knew me, and because they were from conservatory, and said, "No, please go on. You can start from somewhere." I said, "No, I'm sorry, I cannot."
Wow.
And then I walked out, and it was not even. I didn't feel ashamed, or, I didn't have any ounce of regret or remorse. It just, I knew that at that moment I was not capable of moving on. However, I did win something.
Wow, there you go.
I won the Albanberg prize because I had performed in a previous round the Albanberg Sonata Opus 1. So anyway, that was
Anyway, so to summarize, if you can't guess, we really want to focus this episode on performance anxiety for musicians. And to that end, we have a very, very special guest on our show today. Please welcome Dr. Robert Hall. Dr. Hall, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come talk to us and to share some of your expertise on how musicians can deal with performance anxiety. And what's wonderful is that you yourself are a musician. You graduated magna cum laude from Temple University as a trombone major. And if I understand correctly, you were also a conductor of one of the orchestras in New Jersey for a number of years. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And first of all, thank you very much for asking me to be here with you tonight. It's a great opportunity to talk about a subject which I think all performing artists deal with sooner or later. And I'm dealing with it right at this moment, by the way.
Oh, I got.
No, a little bit, manageable. But I've also, as a performer, dealt with it as in the ways you just described. I don't play the piano; I play the trombone. It's a whole different set of circumstances.
Sure.
But it's amazing how simple the formula is, at least on a physiological level, that leads to that kind of experience and that kind of response. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone who has never ever experienced this, who perform. And it's not just musicians, by the way; it's performers of all types. I think I read once somewhere that the most common version of this story is not musical performance; it's actually public speaking.
Yes, I've heard that too.
It's very challenging for people to get up and talk in front of an audience, particularly if they're not used to doing that or they haven't been schooled in how to do that. You think, oh, I just get up and start talking, get up there, and all those same things that you just described will happen. Your body is affected by the outflow of adrenaline. We get into some of the physiology of it later on. Dancers, actors. Interestingly enough, something I read today, people who have to do very finely motor tuned things like surgeons, people who participate in certain sporting events where absolute stillness is required. If you're an archer, for example, that it affects performance in just about every area that you can imagine. It's funny because just before I came up to be on the show with you tonight, my wife and I are sitting at the table having dinner, and we were recounting all of our performance anxiety experiences over the many years that we worked in the music business. She has her set of them, I've got my set of them, and they go back, to the beginning almost with all of us. You mentioned some things, Hugh, from your childhood, and Madalena, what happened in a contest setting at one point. I can't imagine. I've never done anything quite like that. But it's the same. It affects the great and the small. It affects the proficient and the beginner. It doesn't matter who you are. The physical thing that happens to people in those circumstances is the same from person to person and from situation to situation. Now, how you deal with that may have many different manifestations. I'm always in awe of people who don't seem to suffer from this at all. I guess they exist. I'm not entirely sure, but from my friends and people that I played with over the years, I know some people were dramatically affected by performance anxiety, and others you could barely tell if they were, and whatever. I came across something very interesting today. Are you familiar with the pianist Seymour Bernstein?
Of course, yes.
I have worked with him. I have worked with him several times. Yeah.
Well, I would love to meet the man. I never heard of him before today.
He's still up in Maine for
97 years old, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I watched a bit of the Ethan Hawke documentary, Introduction to Seymour, and another one which was more pertinent to what we're talking about tonight. It was a one-on-one interview with somebody else, where he talked about his own experience with this, and he made a point which I thought was very important. For musicians, this is especially difficult because it leads them to feeling ashamed of their playing.
Yes,
right.
True.
And isn't that the worst thing you would ever want to do, is feel ashamed of your playing? And so one of the points he makes is that it's not a weakness to experience performance anxiety. It shows that you're a person of responsibility. That was the way he phrased it anyway. I like that. Sort of took some of the sting out of it.
I suppose. I think the problem I have is, yes, we can maybe pat ourselves and say, okay, it's normal, it's fine. It's still a horrible thing to feel, especially when it gets in the way of us playing at our best.
Well,
no question about that.
That's the thing, because we want to play the best, and I wouldn't say that we shouldn't give any pressure, right? We shouldn't give ourselves any pressure. It's precisely because we have that responsibility and we feel it, and we're human beings, so I think that happens.
Yeah. So
one of the things that led him to stop performing, because he stopped performing not entirely, but didn't give recitals for something like 37 years, according to him. So, but he said he reached a point at around the age of 50 where he realized that so much of his life had been spent practicing just in order to recreate some piece of music, not to create, but to recreate over and over. And that he reached a point, sort of a breaking point. And then he started talking about, I need to create. And so he began to he took a break from whatever sort of schedule he had of performance before, and he began to compose, began to encourage his students to compose as a means of creation. You have to play a cadenza, you write it. You challenge them to write their own stuff. And I believe he's composed pieces himself. but he wanted to take a different. Then when he came back to it after this, I think with the Ethan Hawke documentary, he started to perform a bit more regularly again. On what he's doing now, he's 97 years old. These weren't the most recent videos of him, but what a guy! I mean, I was totally impressed by what he had to say about the subject and him as a person. I just very likable, a mensch, as you would say, right? Good man, good man.
So, as I mentioned, I don't know if I remember to mention, but Dr. Hall, you and I worked together at Curtis briefly when I was there as a director of student recitals and instrumental accompaniment, and that's how we got to know each other. And you happened to come to Cunningham Piano, where I work, and we saw each other after just many years.
Oh, that was funny.
That was
I just walked in the store because I got to. What can I say? In my dotage here, I don't play the trombone much anymore. I still practice here and there. I don't have many things to play, but I began to think about the piano once again, and so I got what you call the piano munchies. I started reading about pianos, watching videos about pianos, stopping into piano stores, and that's why I showed up on your doorstep about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Wow. And I walk into Cunningham in King of Prussia, and this very jovial character who's sitting here talking to us tonight comes up, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, wait, what is this? And I said, what is your name? And he said, Hugh Sung. I said, oh my God. And then we started to talk about some shared experiences from those days in the 90s mostly, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
The foundation for that, as you and I learned that day, goes back to my relationship with Robert Fitzpatrick, who was the dean for many years at Curtis, but I met him as a senior in high school where he was my band director when he was a student at Curtis, by the way.
Incredible.
67, 68.
Wow.
And then Bob and I did all sorts of things over the years, one of which was the orchestra that I conducted in New Jersey, which he had for many years before that. And when he left, I had been his assistant for a while, and then I took the orchestra over after he left. I did it for about 8 more years.
That's incredible.
And kept in touch with him until he went off to Paris and unfortunately passed away a few years ago.
Yeah.
But we were very close friends, played together, taught together, all sorts of things.
That's wonderful.
So that's how I, that was the connection I had. But the Curtis thing was unique because of Bob being the dean there was a case of a student at Curtis at the time who required help, shall we say.
Yeah.
And he called me on the phone one day, and the student, we wanted me to meet with a student in a hospital setting, and I did so. And then that student became my patient for a while after that. But then that blossomed into this issue of performance anxiety as a sort of a side issue, I guess. But he said, why don't you come into the school? We can set you up in that nice room. What is that room?
The Bach room.
The name.
The Bach room.
The Bach room, of course. That was my office, by the way. The Bach room was
Nice.
my office. And for a few years, I came in maybe once a week, and students were just invited. You want to go talk to the doctor? He's in the Bach room. Go talk to the doctor. And so kids would come in and talk about whatever. And some were planning to take an audition. There were medication questions about performance anxiety, and we talk about that. And sometimes it was just a gab fest. We just talked about stuff.
Nice.
But very, very good. And I'm sure if I mentioned more names of students who were there, you were friends with this one and that one, so we won't get into all that. But there was a lot of overlap there.
Yeah. So again, it's wonderful to reconnect and to see how the world is such a small place. It's just incredible. So let's get back on topic.
Absolutely.
Let's focus a little bit again.
Right.
Performance anxiety. So we've talked about some of the symptoms that we've experienced. Can you help?
Right.
And you've actually mentioned that it's the same for most people. It's a diminishing. But how would you define it from a medical point of view?
So I'm going to mention 3 areas that we consider in psychiatry, but I mean, we always think about issues, problems, what have you, from a biological standpoint, from a psychological standpoint, and from a social standpoint. All right, so the biology is pretty straightforward. Performance anxiety biology is fairly straightforward. I'll dwell on that in just a second. When we talk about the psychology, well, it's obviously affected by the biology. If you've had a bad experience in performance, you might be worried about the next performance that you're going to have another bad experience. So your mind starts to develop anticipatory anxiety about the next thing that's going to happen. And then, of course, the social circumstances of your life. What's your living situation like? What are your relationships like? What is your experience from the past been like? But let me start with the biological part of it because it's quite simple. You mentioned, Mada, earlier on the fight or flight problem, right? So your body is made to get you out of trouble when trouble arises. So what's trouble? Well, you have to flee from a dangerous situation. You're suddenly accosted by, I don't know what, a barking dog. You're afraid. You want to get away. Somebody tries to mess with you on the street, you have a near miss while you're driving your car, or you get up to play the trombone and it's time to play the bolero or something like that. So, fight or flight syndrome kicks in. And so your adrenal glands produce hormones which are meant to help you in those situations. The problem is they often act up when they don't really help you in those situations. So we're talking, the common term is adrenaline, but we're talking about catecholamine hormones, which are released by the adrenal glands, which are to help you get away from the attacking dog or the car which has just cut you off that you just nearly missed, or whatever it happens to be. The problem is that when you talk about musical performing, you may feel like you want to die or that you're going to die, but you're not going to die. You're not in mortal danger. I mean, I don't know, if you're on the stage in Italy in an opera and they want to throw vegetables at you, I guess that could be a little more mortal, but generally that doesn't happen in this country. Generally it doesn't happen here. So what would be useful? Well, is there a way to defeat that adrenaline response? And the answer is yes, there is. And I think most musicians know about this now. I try to remember when I discovered this. This stuff's been around since like 1964, but I'd never heard of it until somewhere in maybe the 80s even. It wasn't commonly, and I wasn't a doctor at the time. I hadn't been to medical school yet or anything like that. But all right, so the adrenaline, your body, and it's sudden, it's instantaneous. It can happen in a flash. You just when you put your hand on a hot stove and jerk your hand away so you don't get burned, you don't even think about that. You don't think about getting your hand off the hot stove. It just happens. So your nervous system is made of two components. There's a sympathetic part and a parasympathetic part. If you want to make an analogy to driving a car, the sympathetic part is the gas pedal, and the parasympathetic part is the brakes.
Interesting. Okay.
So sympathetic part does stuff. It enables you to leap tall buildings in a single bound, lift heavy loads, whatever it happens to be, run very fast away from danger. And the parasympathetic part kicks in when you're digesting your food, you're going to sleep, or your body's restoring itself as you're lying on the beach, etc. And they're complementary systems. They're very well balanced, ideally, so that one doesn't overwhelm the other. They have different parts of the body that they control at different times. Okay, so getting back to the instant when you're on the stage and you're performing, what do you do about that? Well, there are things, I remember what Seymour Bernstein said today. He said the two things that he points out to everyone is, of course, you have to be prepared to play, right? You're going to perform on stage. You got to be prepared. So practice is a big part, and being prepared. But the other part of it is performance experience, to have successful performance experience. And that can be a great help, which means if you're going to do something, you can tell me, you're going to do something really challenging, a solo or a recital, should you perform it elsewhere before you perform it on the big stage where it's, maybe you could talk about that a little bit. How would you utilize that advice, performance experience?
I mean, definitely, because I like to think as let me screw up before the big event. I mean, let me get all the things that I do wrong at some point, and let me see where I am at this point, right? So that I know what to fix. And ideally would be to be done, I don't know, maybe 2-3 weeks in advance before the big event,
right?
So that there's still time to fix, right? Whatever there is to be fixed. And then, I mean, preparation is absolutely crucial. At Temple, I'm sure you know Professor the cello. Jeffrey Solo?
Jeffrey Solo.
Yes, Jeffrey Solo. I don't know if you know this name, but probably yes.
I know of him, yeah.
On his door, there's a quote. Nothing replaces a genuine lack of preparation. Nothing. I mean, nothing helps with that. If you're unprepared, that's it. There's nothing
Truer
to be
words
done.
were never spoken, right?
Yes, there's nothing else to be done to replace that. So you begin and you end with that. And then like you said, the psychological part of it depends on each individual. But yes, running through the repertoire before, I mean, in front of family, friends, whoever you might think interesting, like anyone that can give you that can raise your adrenaline level, right? They can give your that kind of simulation of nervousness. That's really helpful. Yeah.
The one time I mentioned this, I think in my resume, so to speak. with concerto soloists years ago, many years ago, I did play an alto trombone concerto of all things. I didn't even know what an alto trombone was until about a year before that.
Interesting.
But Mark Mostovoy, who was the music director, came to me, "Why don't you play this such and such concerto?" I said, "Oh, I was young and crazy." I said, "Why not?" So, I eventually stepped out on the stage of the Walnut Street Theater with the string orchestra behind me and played the piece and another piece. But the night before, played it at a place called the Pen and Pencil Club on Latimer Street, somewhere in Center City, with an audience where I'm a trombone player. The audience was literally as close to me as my screen is to me right now. Wow. I mean, I'm playing the alto trombone in their face, So that was it was good, actually, because I don't think I would have played as well the next night or whenever it was if I hadn't done that. And there was no medicine then. I'm not talking about, beta blockers and things like that. It was just like, okay, we're going to do this. And it was good, actually a good experience to have done that. I was nervous, it was shaky here and there, but got through it okay. And then the next night, I think I played better because I'd done that.
Interesting.
So you're right, previewing, pre-playing, what have you, for a supportive audience, is always a good idea.
So why is that so beneficial? I mean, why is it that practicing the performance again and simulated with different audiences or performing it multiple times, why does that help so much to ease our anxiety?
The best predictor of future behavior is past behavior.
Oh, there you go. Okay, wonderful.
In a very general way. I mean, that's true of just about anything I can think of. I think of it in psychiatry and human behavior, but if you have a number of successful experiences, you figure, well, my chances are better of having that same kind of experience again, I mean, it's very person specific. It's very repertoire specific. It's very situation specific. But generally speaking, pick a piece that you've played many times before many different audiences, and ask yourself, well, I had a lot of successful experiences. I bet my next one will be successful too with that particular piece. I can't imagine it suddenly going off the rails, because I've actually played it a number of times, and I think I can do this. So that becomes a kind of a psychological support, because there is a terrible thing called anticipatory anxiety where, concert's a month away or a week away or whatever away, and already I'm dying every day because it's going to be hard. Yeah. Well, if I've done it a million times before, particularly for orchestral musicians, because solos in the orchestra come up year after year after year after year. And, I think if you've successfully handled it in the past, you'll probably be more likely to handle it successfully in the future.
So what are some other tips that you would give? So practicing the performance, are there any other things that can help in the moment? If you're on stage, you've already done your practice, but you're still feeling nervous. You're feeling like you're losing some control. What do you do then?
You have to acknowledge to yourself that that's probably what's going to happen. You're not going to be surprised that this thing called butterflies in the stomach. You know what it feels like?
Yes, all too well.
I tried to research this. What is the physical or biological underpinning? There's no butterflies in your stomach, but what is it that makes that thing? And there's no answer to it.
Really?
What it is it's thought to be a clash between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems.
Interesting.
Maybe something involving the vagus nerve, which is this long nerve which starts way up here, goes down through it controls your heart, your gut, everything in sight. And so there's something, maybe it's some kind of disruption. It's unpleasant, but it's kind of exhilarating at the same time. It's weird, butterflies in the stomach. I don't think there's any. I'm not sure even that's a direct adrenaline response or not. I don't know. Probably has an adrenaline component, but it's not the whole story. Nervous system's an amazing thing. It can serve your purposes, or it can get in your way.
Get in your way, definitely.
So
I heard I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Again, back to the question.
You may have a particular dread about something, right? A particular piece. Seymour Bernstein says that he's talking about Michael Rabin. Michael Rabin was a famous violinist, and he had developed this terrible phobia about dropping his bow in the middle of a performance. And so after dealing with this for a long time, he made an agreement with his accompanist. He says, "Look, in measure 37, I'm going to drop my bow on the floor." And he actually did it at a performance. And he stopped, picked up the bow off the floor, started the piece again from the beginning. Everything was fine. I don't think he ever worried about dropping his bow again after that.
Interesting.
So that intentionally.
It's a psychological thing. Yeah. He said, "I'm going to take this from a psychological standpoint. If somebody has a problem in psychiatry, we call like OCD, obsessive compulsive problems. One of the ways to treat that is by gradual exposure, right? Yeah. Or even a flooding experience sometimes where you just expose yourself to the whole thing all at once, right? I think unfortunately as musicians we do the flooding thing fairly frequently, where you go out on stage, it's time to play, right? Nobody else is going to do that for you. So if we let's talk about the adrenaline issue for 1 second. Your body is attuned to respond to adrenaline outflow from your adrenal glands in a variety of ways, all of which are considered protective if you're really in a dangerous situation. So here's one thing that happens: your pupils suddenly get very large, because if you're running away from a ravaging something or other, you want to be able to see as well as you can. So your body will open your pupils up as far as they can go, so that you get all the whatever low light you happen to be running in, you've got enough running that you can get away. All right. Problem is that's not good if you're trying to read music on a page, right? If your pupils suddenly open up real wide, you won't be able to focus your vision as well. I don't know if that affected you. I never hear people complain about that much. What they complain about is dry mouth, shaking hands, sweating, heart pounding. I can't breathe, right? Those are the things which, while your heart pounding is good if you're running away from a vicious animal, opening the blood flow to your big muscles so you can run and do all the things you need to do, okay. Dry mouth, well, the adrenaline affects your whole digestive tract. It wants to sort of like clear the stage, right? Get rid of everything, so to speak. So it does affect your digestive system as well. So your body has these beta adrenergic receptors all over the place. All right, beta adrenergic, so they respond to adrenaline, right? And there are different types of them. There's beta 1, beta 2, and beta 3, be that as it may. But they're all through your body: your muscles, your nervous system, your glands, your heart, your stomach, your eyes, everything. So you suddenly get this flood of adrenaline in this sort of quasi or supposedly dangerous situation, and all of those things happen at the same time. Well, so around 1964, first was synthesized what's called a beta blocker. And the first one was propranolol. All right, so beta blockers were designed to treat hypertension, high blood pressure, and also to be protective in the wake of a heart attack or stroke, so that you don't get in trouble after that. Somewhere around the late 70s, early 80s, they became more available for other uses, and musicians sort of caught on to this. And so I don't remember the first time I availed myself of this. I can't recall what it was. I can remember the times that I didn't before it was available. I have trouble remembering afterwards, other than they seem to work like a charm for me. People are different. Not everybody responds exactly the same way. But let me explain what they do. If you have these adrenaline receptors all over your body, what the beta blocker does is it's like a key that fits into that lock but doesn't do anything. So instead of adrenaline coming into that receptor and turning on whatever it tries to turn on, the beta blocker outcompetes it for that receptor site. So there can be all the adrenaline in the world floating around, only none of it's doing anything because it can't get into the site that it wants to.
Interesting.
So it's a receptor antagonist, like a key. Like you ever put the wrong key in your lock? It fits the lock, but you can't turn it, right? That's what beta blockers do on all those adrenaline receptors. So your heart doesn't start racing, ideally. Your mouth doesn't go so dry. Your hands don't start shaking. You don't start sweating, etc.
Interesting.
Now, this is a very broad picture of it I'm giving you. I mean, it's very individual. I've worked with people a lot over the years, mostly performing musicians, not other types of performing artists, but performing musicians. And I found to be very successful for a lot of people. There are some people who should avoid them because they have a certain kind of heart conduction block. No, don't do that. They have a condition of bronchospasm with the lungs. No, don't do that. But most people tolerate them quite well, and they're very effective. The good thing about them is they're effective for a period of about 6 hours. So it's like Tylenol in terms of its length of action. It goes into your system, it'll peak at about an hour, and by 6 hours it's on the way out and done, right? So you think about it, you have a concert at 8 o'clock, and you took a beta blocker at 7 p.m. or maybe 6:30 if you want to be a little more careful. By the time it's time to walk out on the stage and play whatever you're going to play, it's fully active. I would never recommend to somebody do this the first time at a concert. Not a good idea. You want to try something like this ahead of time under supervision, and musicians don't do it under supervision. Something like 30% of musicians have used these medications, and most of them get them from friends, not from doctors.
Oh no! But you're supposed to get them by prescription. Oh boy. Okay.
Yeah, they are prescribed. Well,
they're supposed to be prescribed.
They are prescribed.
Okay, all right.
When your stand partner's second violin section says, "Do you have any beta blockers?" I'm not kidding. I mean, it happens all the time. So
I have a question.
And the
yeah.
good news is that they're safe. Even when that happens, they're considered safe. I'm being careful. I'm a doctor here. They should be used only by prescription under the, that's my disclaimer anyway.
Sure.
And since I'm a doctor, I can say that.
So, quick question.
Sorry.
I know that one of the things I heard growing up were the natural beta blockers like bananas or peanut butter. Bananas in particular, we would eat. I would eat like a banana an hour ahead, a second banana 30 minutes before a concert. Are bananas effective as natural beta blockers, or are there other natural beta blockers that you don't need medications for?
I have never heard the banana story. Never.
Actually, what I know, I can confirm what Hugh said. I mean, from what I have been taught, that bananas contain potassium that is very good to get you through a session of workout, and it's recommended to athletes or people that weightlift. They do a lot of weightlifting and performance. And for me works a banana before like an hour.
Just all the tennis players at Wimbledon have bananas in their tennis bag. They eat them between sets and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Now, what does a banana have? Banana has potassium, like you say. It also has a lot of carbohydrate. Yeah. So it has some benefits. I don't know that it has any directly adrenaline response benefit. I've never heard that. And peanut butter, maybe even less so. I don't know, but it might be a comfort food. Maybe some peanut butter on your banana and go to town. I don't know of any. There are some herbal things which are supposed to be calming, but this is not a calming issue. In other words, you wouldn't want to take Valium or Xanax before a concert because you're going to slow down. You're going to be motor impaired. It's the same thing like taking a stiff drink before going out on stage. I'm not saying it hasn't been done, but it's a little risky because your motor performance may be impaired by that. I'll tell you what, lifestyle things in general are important. Are you getting enough sleep? Is your diet okay? Are you in good health? Are you under some kind of stress all the time in relationships, in your work, and what have you? All those things can affect your performance.
I have a question. How does exercising help? I mean, what happens? Why is it so beneficial to decrease?
Well, vigorous exercise. So if you're a runner, they talk about the runner's high, right? So you get these, they call natural endorphins being released. They're hormones which have a calming effect. I don't think they're necessarily adrenaline specific, but they may be specific in other ways which are very good for you. I mean, exercise in general is a good thing. Your body's going to function better if you have a regular regimen of exercise. I would be careful, I guess, if I had to play, I don't play the piano, but if I were a pianist who had to do whatever you did last night, I would think you would be careful about how much exercise you might get during the day that you're playing. No? I mean, you weren't out running the streets of New York before the concert. I will assume.
It was actually very rushing, everything. It sometimes against the clock, but
Yeah. I had a funny experience once, and this will be along these lines. I'm sitting on the stage at the Academy. I think I was, and I knew about beta blockers, and I had used them at that point. But I'm on the stage, we're playing with the Philly Pops, and I'm sitting in the back, I'm thinking, I had a cold, and I had taken a cold medicine. Probably had dextromethorphan and maybe something else, antihistamine. Oh, probably like Benadryl or something like that. And I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, man, I feel really relaxed. And I thought, gee, I wonder if this would work like beta blockers do. And at some later point, I actually tested that, and guess what? Didn't do anything. no, absolutely nothing. I was nice and relaxed, but the adrenaline was just, was all there. It was doing what it normally does. So,
but in a relaxed state.
I learned. I was experimenting on myself.
At least it's something.
Yeah, I was very relaxed, but I was nervous as could be. Yeah, so it's weird. It's weird.
So for somebody who doesn't choose to take beta blockers and still want some other ways to deal with the anxiety they feel on stage, do you have any other suggestions?
Some of the things that we've already talked about, lifestyle issues, obviously being prepared. That's the main thing. I will tell you a funny story that Seymour Bernstein told in this talk today. He said he got invited one day by the whoever Steinway people in New York, the basement thing, and Horowitz was going to come in and select his piano. So he knew a guy at Steinway. He said, well, come on, I'll leave the door open. You can just watch. He said, so he's watching Horowitz try piano, whatever, and Horowitz's wife is feeding him chocolate. And Bernstein gets this idea, that's it, that's the answer to my performance anxiety, it's chocolate. He said, so the next time he had to play a concert, he had a couple of chocolate bars, and he got a sugar high and couldn't perform very well. And then he told another story about he had a violinist who said her secret was because her hands would get sweaty. So she said she took egg white and put it on her hands, and that kept her hands from sweating. So I said, that must be the answer, he thought to himself. So he says he tried that too, and he was playing Bach Chaconne, the Busoni arrangement of the Bach Chaconne, and he said it was like an omelet on the keyboard. It's a great story. Great story.
Fantastic. Oh my goodness.
And sticky too. Yeah.
So I guess you take all of these.
So
natural,
take care of yourself. I guess there can be a point where therapy could be helpful. We have this thing, probably the reigning model of therapy nowadays is a thing called cognitive behavioral therapy. And I'm going to boil it down to like its most simple element. Cognitive behavioral therapy says that thoughts come first and feelings follow along like cars on a train. So a thought comes into my mind, I have a feeling, the feeling's so strong it pushes the thought out, and now I'm left with nothing but the feeling.
Interesting.
And if it's a particularly bad feeling, that's unpleasant. And a lot of times that's based on past experiences that didn't go well, negative thing, and then you start to I can't do this, I'm no good at this, and it's going to happen again the next time I go out on the stage, and you've been to self-condemn and all this sort of thing. And cognitive behavioral therapy says, look, hold on a second, let's talk about the thoughts, because the feelings are so overwhelming at times that the thoughts just go right. I don't even know what the thought was. I just feel terrible, and I don't know why. Well, you got to go back and examine the thinking process, the thought process. I'll give you a simple example of this. This was told to me by a psychiatrist when I was in training. He said, I had this experience when I was a boy. He said, I was playing baseball. I was very young, he said. And we're all out on the field playing baseball, but he said, I'm out in left field and I'm sitting down and everybody's laughing at me. And he says, I never forgot that. It was so terrible. And it scarred him like for life, apparently. So 30 years later, he's talking to his brother about it. And his brother says, wait a minute, I was there that day. That's not what happened at all. He said, the game had stopped. He said, something had happened and the game had stopped. All the young kids were sitting down at their positions on the field, and somebody came out to entertain the crowd, and the crowd was laughing, and it had nothing to do with you. But he'd been carrying around this negative experience for decades, literally decades. They laughed at me that day when I was trying to be a baseball player, and then he learned many, many years later, well, that's not even what happened. So all those bad feelings were not even appropriate to what had happened.
Interesting, yeah.
They were not real.
So, and I think we all kind of do that to ourselves, based on, or people foist it on us. I don't know, but cognitive behavioral therapy starts to tease out what are the thoughts, what are the memories, what are the things that are sort of stuck in your brain that come back and bring these feelings along with them, and what can you do about that? Can you work through that? And it's particularly good for anxiety disorders, particularly good for mood disorders, depression, etc. It's very effective for obsessive compulsive problems, very effective for that. I mean, it takes time and investment, but it's not like the kind of, not like Freudian psychoanalysis, right? So I think Woody Allen, who was in psychoanalysis like his whole life, right?
Yeah.
At one point in one of his books says, I'm going to give psychoanalysis 10 more years and then I'm going to Lourdes, he said. Right? So if it doesn't work in 10 more years, I'll go look for a miracle.
Yeah.
But, cognitive behavioral therapy says we're going to take a set period of time, usually 12 weeks, 16 weeks, and we're going to identify a problem, we're going to work on it, and you're going to do homework. You're going to take some work home with you, and you're going to work through some of this stuff, and it's extremely effective. And I will tell you that when I was in training at Jefferson, they brought in somebody, a cognitive behavioral person from Penn, which is where it all started. And she gave us a wonderful lecture. And we had been influenced by a lot of psychoanalytic people who were still at Jefferson. And one of my class raised her hand and said, well, what do you folks think about the unconscious? Which is Freud's big thing, right?
Right.
And this woman spoke up and said, well, we don't believe in that.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
We don't believe in that.
Interesting.
We don't believe in that. So, so it was a whole entirely different approach. So I'm not denying that there's some value to the psychoanalytic thing, but that's not what they were all about. They were all about you've got thoughts that bring feelings with them. Let's work on that. You don't need to lay on the couch for X years, necessarily.
Funny,
Maybe,
yeah.
Go on,
you
I'm sorry.
mentioned about Professor Lambert Orkis in one of the previous emails, and how much you appreciated and you were impressed by the videos and his presence at Temple 50 years ago, even back then. Something between the lines that you just said about cognitive behavioral therapy. I have been doing some things like that. I started years ago myself, but something that he taught me, I don't think he knew exactly that was part of the cognitive behavioral therapy thing, was this simple phrase: think the right thoughts. And this phrase, I heard it from day one.
Bingo.
In 2019,
Bingo.
when I came to Temple, no one else had ever dissected things like that so simply, right?
Right.
For me to understand, and to actually have such great impact. And since then, pretty much everything has changed, just because I forced myself to really think the thoughts before whatever, feelings or something. Just think the right thoughts, because if you're there, if you're in the moment and you think, what's next? I'm playing, and what's next to be done? I don't have time to think of, oh my God, I'm nervous. Oh my God, what's, so
Yeah. Right.
with this line, he has solved a lot of my anxiety, really, regarding
Isn't that amazing?
performance.
It's so simple. It seems like, right?
It's
like unlocking
it
the door,
simple.
and then,
It is
whoa! I never
simple.
thought that before.
Yeah, but in the same time, if you don't have the training to do that, at first it's very difficult, and it's not easy to manage. But then with time, it does get.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and you said 50 years ago. I hate to tell you, it's almost 60 years ago. 55 years now, if I remember correctly. Since I knew him, I went into Temple in 1968, and he was well established there by then. He accompanied my wife's senior recital. One of his students accompanied mine. Here's the funny thing. I had a little job at Temple when I was there, which I inherited from another trombone player who graduated, was that I got to record all the recitals.
So you've really done it all.
It made me think. He was all these things that he played. I was there recording them for the give the tape to the performer and that sort of thing. And he was a mythic figure even then. I just knocked out by those 3 videos. I made my wife watch them with me. I didn't make her. I invited her to watch them with me, and we brought back so many the names he's talking about, Marianne Filar and this and that. I mean, oh my goodness gracious.
Yeah.
And also to find out he's just a kid from Northeast Philadelphia.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. We had no idea his origin story. Where did Lambert Orkis come from? Did he drop out of the sky? No. He was that neighborhood kid from Northeast Philadelphia. It was fantastic.
Well, we were very honored.
We were very honored, and he was very appreciative of us doing this and taking interest in his life like this from beginning till the present time. And apparently no one has ever done this before, because all the time he would be associated with some other musicians, obviously, but no one has ever sat with him like we did and talked to him only about him. Yeah. So it was
I said to my wife tonight, I said, I reminded her that he accompanied your recital. She said yes, and she told me what the program was and all this sort of thing. And I said, what was it like to work with it? She says, wonderful. That's all she could remember. It's just wonderful to work with him. He made it easy for her.
I wanted to kind of get us back on topic a little bit. I really appreciated your description of cognitive therapy, and I remember some of the early struggles I had with my stage fright was the little voice in my head saying things like, oh, you're going to mess that up, or you're not ready for this. A lot of guilt, a lot of pre-shaming, even, trying to play through with this distracting voice that was really throwing a lot of negativity in terms of failure. You're going to mess this up, and what that.
So let me ask you a question then.
Sure.
Was that all self-manufactured, or is that voice that you're hearing related to mentors, teachers, others, etc., that demanding, maybe not, I don't know. What do you think?
I think
did you
I think it was a combination of.
Well, yeah, probably is, yeah.
Sure.
But I mean, it's hard to imagine that you would manufacture that entirely by yourself. And I can think about things that I'll tell you what helped me. I came into Temple as a freshman. I'm a trombone player. I'm just out of high school. I've never even played in an orchestra yet, I don't think. And I am auditioning for Keith Brown. Keith Brown was the instrumental. He was the conductor there. And Keith Brown was one of the finest trombonists of the 20th century. He played in the Philadelphia Orchestra for a couple of years, played in the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, et cetera, et cetera. So I played for Keith. and whatever I did, my little thing. And he said to me this, and it's like money in the bank. He said, "I see no reason why you can't become a fine trombonist," he said. And I just like putting money in the bank, Now, and I've had other people who have given me that kind of encouragement at times, and that's the other thing. This like the Seymour Bernstein thing. It's very encouraging to his students, practicing with them, showing, but never debasing them. Never, it's all very paternal in a way. It's beautiful, just the way it should be. And I can name other people. When I was going to make a big career change out of one thing, music, to something else, a mentor from my high school days said, "Oh, you're doing the right thing." I mean, just gave me that, and gave me liberty to do it. When I was going to go into medical school, I was conducting the orchestra in Toms River, New Jersey. And the people who were behind it were a couple who were in their 70s by that time. They had founded the orchestra. And I finally revealed to them that I was going to go to medical school, which means I would be leaving the orchestra in a while. And the wife, was just another wonderful person, said, talk about, I think, the MCAT exam, which is the entrance exam. And I hadn't taken it yet, and I was worried about it, taking this MCAT exam, medical college admission test. And she says, "Well," she said, "if you don't make it the first time," she said, "you just take it again and again until you do." And I thought, she gave me permission to fail.
Yeah,
Permission to fail. And guess what? I didn't fail. And if I had, it would have been okay. I would have done exactly what she said. I would have done it again and again until it worked.
Can I speak to that for just a second? Because,
please,
curiously, I think that's what cured, if you want to say the right word, cured my anxiety. It was actually, I remember I was invited to play Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto with a local orchestra. I was 17 at the time, and it was a brand new piece. They had only given me 2 months to learn it from scratch, so I really didn't have time to memorize it, learn it. It was a little foolhardy, right? And then I go out for the first concert, about 2,000 people in the audience. And we start the beginning. I get through the opening, and then blank. My brain just goes, I have no idea what to do, and I just stare at the piano. The orchestra's looking at me. The conductor's looking at me like, "What's going on?" I just froze, and for 2 pages. Luckily, I kind of had the music put up there. I just started with 8 pages and found my way and kind of played with the help of the music over the. But it was humiliating, and I thought it was my worst nightmare come true. In fact, after the concert, somebody came up to me backstage and said, "Boy, you really messed up, didn't you?" So it wasn't even a small thing. I mean, everybody knew I had just dumped a big one. And it was, I'll never forget how horrible it was, but the sun still rose the next day. The world still turned. It does. And I think that was the most amazing thing to realize, that as horrible as that feeling was, I was still alive. I still had 4 more concerts to go on this tour. And if it was that bad and I could still survive it, well, how much worse could it get? And fortunately, the remaining concerts went flawlessly, and the newspaper reporter came to the second concert. Thank goodness. But the failure was what kind of woke me up to realize, like, why am I so anxious? What's the worst that can happen now that I've gone through that? Does that make sense?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Perfect sense. Yeah, I bet you would have said, "Well, I wish I could have spared you that if I had a magic wand." But guess what? Maybe it was necessary for you to experience that. Say, "Oh, okay," and then go on and do better.
Yeah, permission to fail, right? And get
permission
over
to fail.
The fear of failure. Yeah.
Yeah, I played badly on occasion. I've traveled down to Houston Symphony to audition back in the 1980s and couldn't keep a steady tone. Just nervous as could be, Sure. And other times I played audition in Philadelphia, got through the first cut to the second cut and played well, and didn't have that same problem. So it's just it's specific to the experience, the repertoire, the orchestra, the conductor, the whole 9 yards.
I have one thing just more to maybe share, and I wanted your opinion on this because I've talked to a lot of younger musicians who struggle and ask me advice in terms of what to do with performance anxiety. One of the things that I give the illustration of is, when you feel what you feel on stage, it's a little bit like you get superpowers. Your vision gets heightened, your sense of time gets heightened. I mean, all the flight and fight response, but I translate that as an infusion of superpowers. and you're and the difficulty is controlling these newfound powers, like Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, trying to learn how to leap and climb walls as a bumbling Spider-Man at the beginning of his career. And I don't know how accurate that is. Is that an accurate way of describing that?
Adrenaline is a double-edged sword. It can actually, or this kind of performance anxiety. We should do away with the term stage fright. That sounds just so terrible.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Performance anxiety, whatever you want to call it, can actually help you perform better in certain circumstances. So it's not your enemy. It's not your total enemy. You have to know yourself. You have to have had experiences, probably positive and negative with this sort of thing, and decide how. I mean, some people, it's been so bad that they just stop performing. Famous musicians, just stop performing in public. Glenn Gould stopped performing in public. Seymour, I got a whole list here. Casals talks about what it was like for him. Horowitz just stopped for years on end. Renee Fleming, Friedrich Chopin. Nobody's immune. Nobody gets away. Nobody gets out of this without experiencing something of this. And it is enervating. It does help you. It can a little bit of. Adrenaline can bring out the best in you. A little too much can make a performance very difficult. I don't think beta blockers are the overall blanket answer for everybody. They're just they can be useful for a time. They can be useful in certain circumstances. They are effective. They don't seem to have a big downside, and it's better than getting drunk. I'll put it that way, because the musician's drug of choice in the past was get drunk. And some people could get drunk and go out on stage and play, or get high. Not with Valium and Xanax, but with other things, and go out and play. But the problem is that alcohol and all those other things are just lousy medications, because you can't control the dose, you can't control the response, and I think it's a rare bird who could have a couple of drinks and go out on stage and play their best. But
of course, I'm
not one of them.
I'm sure there's a cumulative effect over time. It just makes it, you need more of that, and then it wrecks your health over time too.
We've all heard stories about people whose careers and lives have been wrecked by that sort of thing. Absolutely. I mean, the great jazz musicians, Charlie Parker, the great the alto saxophone player, and his drug problem, and Whitney Houston, the singer. It's a very, very long list. Very long list. People whose lives have been ruined in some cases by that problem.
Yeah, I think, just to add to what you just said, I think a solid knowledge about ourselves would help us to identify what can help, what can work, and what doesn't, right? So it takes a long time. It does not solve it overnight, but I think it is worth it. I mean, if we really want to perform, it doesn't matter if we're musicians or actors, or if we really want to be out there,
you're out there to offer something to someone else, right? That's what performance is. You're offering something beautiful to others, right? That's an act of love, basically. Now, it may have a lot of other aspects in it too. My personal pride, my whatever, my reputation, my bank account, my whatever. But I mean, even that. Some of the worst people, are not necessarily the worst musicians. They're just it's the arena in which they can actually offer something to others. That's a beautiful thing. And you can read about it in the lives of the great musicians, composers, performers. There's nothing new, for sure. Everybody envies others who don't. I listened to From the Top, that radio program with 9-year-old kids playing the Mendelssohn Concerto. More power to them. I was not one of those. I didn't play the trombone until I entered high school. And what did I want to say about that? I was going to say something about it. I think in my sophomore year, we were preparing a piece to go to a competition, and there was a spot where it was a little bit chant-like in the middle of it, where the first trombone had to play a descending 3 notes from C, middle C, B natural, A natural, and then he drops down a third, and the second trombone comes in playing the same 3 notes. And by the time the third trombone, now there's these parallel triads moving down, and I'm sitting in the first chair, second spot, and I have to play 3 notes, 3 half notes in a row, and maybe 2 half notes and a whole note. And I'm thinking, oh my God, the world might end if I blow this, right? And I'm sure we played it at the school, but we were supposed to take it down to Washington to a competition in Washington D.C. And the good news was there were 4 pieces that the judges could choose from, and they didn't choose that piece. So I think, I mean, how silly! 3 notes, come on. I'm like a 15-year-old kid, and here I'm dying over 3 notes that I have to play with in a band of 120 people when nobody else plays for a second. Well, There you go.
Isn't it
but
amazing?
you get, you
yeah. It's amazing the
it's
anxiety
crazy.
we create for ourselves, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, but I think because of like some of those early experiences, I wouldn't play in front of my family. My family would come over, my parents say, "Why don't you get a trombone and play, Bob?" And I'd say, "No, thank you. I'd rather not do that." No, I'd like to play in the band, and only later in college did I start to like to play solos. And then I got it when I left Temple. I actually dropped out for 2 years. There's a good story.
Oh, yeah.
I got to my senior year. I was an education major, and I finished my senior year, and I got hooked up with four other guys who were graduating from Curtis in 1972, who had a group called the Rittenhouse Brass Quintet.
Oh, wow.
And their trombone player went off to South America. And I just serendipitously, I was on a church job up in Bethlehem at the Moravian College, and I played with these guys, and they invited me to join the group.
How cool.
So this was the best thing I ever did. And they were good players. They were terrific players. They went on to play many of them in symphony orchestras all over the world. So I just dropped out of school for 2 years. I think I'm having a good time now. I'm playing music. I'm enjoying myself. It's a great experience.
Yeah.
But at some point I said, I really should have some kind of a degree from this place. So I came back to Temple in '74, and I talked to people, and I said, look, here's what I've been doing. I'm not going to complete my education degree. I didn't want to do the student teaching. And so I said, how about, can I give a recital and graduate with a performance degree? And they said, yes, you can do that.
Wow.
So I had to attend a few like recitals that I had missed or something, and give a recital, and they let me out with a performance degree.
How about that?
That's great. Can I add something to what you commented upon a little bit earlier? So, you brought it up, the permission to fail, right? And you discussed this. I mean, this is very motivating, obviously. I would say in my case that was not the case. To me, the opposite worked. For me, the opposite worked. Like I received so many times the counter advice, right? To go on, or including from my family or from competition where I didn't perform at my best because of anxiety plus social background, whatever had happened in my family. And then one of the judges talked to my teacher back then, and I think it was I was 17 or something like that, and she had been trained in Russia, and she was that kind of very, very tough musician and very good pianist, but very tough. Yeah. And she said, well, if she can control herself on stage, then she should quit. Just, simple as that. And my teacher considered to tell me that, I don't know why, but instead of, making me really quit, I was like, no, that's not gonna happen. So with me, this
I'll show these guys.
Not necessarily like I'll show them, but it's just the more they said no, and especially this kind of tough reaction without knowing actually what was going on, without any ounce of sympathy, right? Which I thought, we are all humans after all. That really, I think, made me angry, and I said, no, I'm just gonna do what I want to do. So.
Well, that's because you have a strong sense of yourself. You have a strong personality that you could want. Some people would wilt under that kind of criticism and just say, I guess they're right. I guess I should stop. They must be right. That's not you. You had something else in you that enabled you to do that. What I was saying before about the people who gave me that good support at those key moments, I think a lot of times it's the best is when you get that kind of support from people outside yourself, and the worst is when someone you would like to trust cast shade on you. And say, maybe
absolutely.
Keep your day job, is like we say in the music business. Keep your day job. But anyway, so I've been very fortunate that I can count on those key moments when people were very supportive of me. And my parents actually, I was a senior in high school, and I'm figuring, well, I'm going to go to college. What do I want to do? And I'm asking people, what? Well, my parents always said the same thing. They always said, well, you could do whatever you want. And they were confident that I could. They thought this you can do. Now, but they didn't say was, well, you should do this, right? I could have used a little more. Maybe you should consider that. But they just left it wide open. I'm sure whatever you choose, Bob, you'll be fine. And in retrospect, they were right. Although it wasn't always a smooth road. I was able to do what I wanted to do. But in my mind, I thought, well, what do I want to do in college? I thought, well, the only thing I really love is music. Now, I went to, here you go, you'll like this, Hugh. I went to Robert Fitzpatrick on the day before my audition at Temple and said to him, what do I need to know? That's how out of touch I was. I had no idea what I was going to. I was ready to play my instrument, but I wasn't ready for the little theory test, little harmony test, little singing, this and that and the other. And he straightened me out in an hour or two, and so I already know. I realized I already knew that stuff. I just hadn't had a formal instruction in it yet. And I certainly I knew enough to get through there. But can you imagine going to your teacher the day before the audition and say, "What do I need to know for tomorrow?"
That's great.
Wow. I need to know.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Hall, we could probably spend hours talking together on this subject. In fact, I'm actually thinking
we should do it again.
We should do it.
I actually want to invite you back, because I would love to instead of focusing on performance anxiety, I would love to focus on you in your career, which is very unique. Starting out as a musician, and then making that wonderful transition to be in medicine, to be a psychiatrist. And I would love to kind of delve deeper into your unique perspective in both worlds.
I'll whet your appetite by saying that when I finally got to medical school, after 2 years of pre-med at Penn, and I got to medical school, I only wanted to quit every day for the first 2 years.
Wow, that tough.
We can talk about that.
Sure. Well,
but I had a lot of support, which made it. First of all, how old was I? 38 years old when I started medical school.
Wow,
so,
incredible.
I was a little different soon, but I only want to quit every day for 2 years. Then it got better.
We're going to have you back when we want to hear that story. But again, thank you.
Anytime. Sure, that'd be wonderful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I think this was really, really helpful just to kind of hear.
Yeah, I hope this episode will reach out to
lots
a lot
of
our friends and musicians,
Sure.
and will help them and extract whatever they need to overcome their fears.
And this is something we could probably continue to talk about.
Oh, I think it's an endless subject.
Absolutely. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this episode together with Dr. Robert Hall. And for the Mada and Hugh Show, I'm Hugh.
I'm Mada, and we'll see you next time with another special guest.